water is a very serious challenge. It is the blue gold now, in the sense that if the 19th century and maybe the 20th century were defined by oil, the black gold, the 21st and on is likely to be defined by water. Water not in its abundance, is by its scarcity. And the way we have to contend and live with this scarcity. And how do we define this scarcity? And what are the implications of this scarcity? I happen to come from an area which is known to be the most water-poor area. I come from the Middle East. And there are 22 countries there, and 18 of them qualify to be designed and to be described as water poor, where water poverty is defined as less than 1,000 cubic meter per person per year. Many of these countries don't even have 250 cubic meter per person per year. And quite often, much of this water is not the right type of water, it's desalinated water. And to a great extent would consume incredible amount of energy in order to generate this water. To a great extent, this water is no longer an independent commodity. It becomes basically a nexus where there are a major intersection between food, energy, water, and the environment. The most important things about this water is that there is no substitute. If you don't use gas, you could use oil. If you don't use gas and oil, you could use solar or wind. When it comes to water, there is no substitute. There is no alternative. Some people say, well, it's Coke, as if Coca-Cola is water. I mean, it's a joke. There is nothing that substitutes for water. If you don't have water, there's nothing else. Some people are really talking now about sustainability to being basically, fundamentally, exclusively dependent on water. If you don't have water, there is no sustainability. And the issue here is when we talk about sustainability, we talk about our responsibility to bequeath, to hand over to the next generation the same quality, not only quantity, but quality, and that's the big issue here, that we have enjoyed. And there is incredible challenges, whether this is likely to happen. There isn't a country, maybe Canada would be one of the, one of the few countries. We have, some people say 30% of the potable water, and some people say, no, it's not, it has become to be 22%. But by God, the largest amount, the most available potable water in the world. I'd like to say this quiet. I don't want to hear about this. He's already threatening us. At one time, we divided water between us and the US and created something called the IJC, International Joint Commission, to allocate the water of the Great Lakes. And we used, Canadians are smart, you know. They used lake frontage. How many miles do we have that front on the lakes as the basis of how we allocate this water? And from day one, and the Americans were unhappy. They wanted to divide this water in proportion to the population or industry. We could have lost. So far, we have held to this, and it's going to be a challenge to hold it in the future. And increasingly so, as global warming and climate change are defining their characteristics and their implications, particularly in reducing the amount of precipitation and the amount of water we could claim on a renewable basis. In the Middle East, the amount of water we draw is 400% of what is renewably charged every year. the amount of precipitation and the amount of renewable water that's coming in is a quarter of what people are using or abusing in some respects. And the question is, why are we abusing this water? What is it in the way we organize and we value this water that would invite people to recklessly waste or consume at such high levels, exceeding 4 times the amount of renewable water that's coming? And economists always, maybe unjustifiably, but they say the price is not right. Like, if you really want to economize on the use of water, you should charge a price for it that will give incentives to people to economize on it. Today, the price of water is typically determined by using operation and maintenance and maybe a charge of a rate of return on it. But this does not come up to 20% of what the true scarcity of water. And what is the true scarcity of water? It should have the externalities, the opportunity cost, the environmental externality, not just the economic externality. What is the economic externality? In the sense that if you don't charge for this water a right price, you would not be valuing it at what other commodities would be valued. But the issue here, there is too much waste. There is too much, I would say, callous use of water. All right, people talk about technological solutions. Oh, there is drip irrigation. You don't have to flood the fields. But then, do you meter this water? How many farmers really pay the use of water? Like in Lebanon, I know the farmers, I come from a farming family, we measure the amount of water by the capacity. Oh, you have half a meter. But it's not based on use, and it should definitely be used. This is like you pay for your electricity by the amount of amperes that you got, not the amount you use. There needs to be a correspondence between what you pay and what you use. And what you need to do is also to make sure that this price does not invite waste, that would not really reward waste. And this means that we need to get what economists call the scarcity price. This is the price that you would get if you were to obey the scarcity constraint. I tell you, this is maybe a bit technical, but let me give you a story. I went to Harvard to work with a professor who got Nobel Prize, Franklin Fisher. And Franklin Fisher saw a piece I wrote on water in the Middle East and water wars. People were worried about that water scarcity in the Middle East could be a reason for countries going to war. Why? Because 95% of water in some areas in the Middle East are shared. You all know that the Nile River is basically shared between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. And there are lots of people in Lake Victoria in Africa who feel to some extent that Nile is flowing the wrong way and is denying them a chance to get that water. And the Euphrates and Tigris, the historic rivers in Iraq and Syria, are shared with Turkey. And Turkey has built a dam called Ataturk Dam. Unfortunately, it built it exactly on a seismic area where earthquakes are continuously happening, and it's filled with 25 billion cubic meter of water, and this could at any time maybe break and flood the whole region, so to speak. But to a great extent, the Syrians are always at odds with the Turks, and the Iraqis are at odds with the Syrians, and the Kuwaitis are at the odds with the Syrian Turks and the Iraqis. So the issue here, to what extent can we divvy this water? Can we preserve what we call riparian rights. There is a very simple rule that no upstream riparian can use water in such a way that denies the lower riparians from using this water. But there is no treaty, there is no agreement that has really been established in a way that would justly distribute this water. To a great extent, it still depends to a great extent on the military power and the threats that one riparian can impose on others. Instead of being the outcome of negotiation and a just distribution of the scarce resource, it's very much a precarious agreement that to a great extent reflects the existing power and the exercise of power. So to a great extent, the challenges are to find a price, a value that would make this commodity be used to reflect in a way a scarcity, and it's not. Actually, I took all the commodities that water is used and ranked them in terms of intensity. How much does a ton of cotton would require of water to be produced? I ranked them from top to bottom. And then I looked at the value added, about the contribution they make to the economy as another column. And I put them from top to bottom, from highest intensity of water used to the lowest, from the highest value they contribute to the economy to the lowest. And I did something we call correlation. How do they relate to each other? And by God, it's negative. There is no rationality in the way we use the water. Rationality would have really said that we should allocate the scarce resource in proportion to the value it contributes. It's exactly the opposite. And this is not in the Middle East. It's in several continents. I saw the same thing in Asia. I saw the same thing in Latin America. I'm sure I will see it in the US and other places too. To a great extent, water is not used in the manner that reflects its value and scarcity. And to the extent that there is deviation between these two rankings, there is a very strong argument that we need to reallocate the scarce resource in a different way, in a way that would preserve its value, would preserve and reflect its scarcity, and will give some justice to the way we distribute. We are supposed to be talking today about environmental justice. Environmental justice in water is not there. There is nothing that reflects justice. It reflects military power, capacity of certain countries to impose their will on the weaker parties. And this, again, is another issue that needs to be completely reworked and reorganized. The thing I want to tell you about, and that's really an interesting issue. As I told you, I was invited to go and share some of my writings and research with people working in the Middle East. They were a little bit unhappy with me, all right? Not that I was not unhappy with them, but anyway, story short is that I was saying that water has to be used in a more rational and equitable way, otherwise we're going to have water wars. And these people say water wars no sense. I said, listen, it's not that we're going to have water wars. I'm going to tell you bluntly, 1967 war in the Middle East was a water war, because Israel expanded and took all the areas, the headwaters, where water originates. So don't tell me that there hasn't been a water war. There has been one, and it could happen again and would get absolutely worse situation given the fact that climate change and global warming are reflecting their impact in a very vicious way, particularly when it comes to water. Precipitation levels in the Middle East are far less than what used to be, far less. And they are becoming more unpredictable. And like this year in Lebanon, I just came back, and they're worried And Lebanon is an area of mountains, snow and everything, and water to a great extent is not as scarce as it is, say, in Kuwait or Iraq or Tunis or Morocco or Algeria or any one of these countries. The situation now in Lebanon is, so far, they have received, in terms of precipitation, only 1/2 of what they normally get. And this is going to mean that there will be a major shortage in this summer. And shortage is not in terms of how much they can grow in agriculture, because, you know, water, 75% of it is used in agriculture, but it's going to mean even shortages in water for people to use for drinking purposes, for cooking purposes. So to a great extent, we're facing a situation where water is going to become a lot scarcer. And there is really, now, as you know, Israel has already attacked Syria in a number of ways, right? Syria, they got rid of Assad regime, and the Israelis used the vacuum and expanded. Where did it expand? It's in an area called Sheikh Mountain. This is where all the water is, of the Yarmouk River, which is a major tributary of the water that goes into Israel. So to a great extent, there is tension growing and mounting. And the story at the Harvard was, okay, we looked at it, we have this model, they have a mathematical model, which is really a piece of art in many respects, called WAS, Water Allocation System, and now they even expanded it to say multi-year water system. And what it calculates is the scarcity value of price, the price of water that would be the most rational price for water use. And they said, it's so small. If you really look at the contested water in the Middle East between the Palestinians and the Israelis, Lebanese and the Israelis, Syrians and the Israelis, if you add it all up, it's less than 6 F-35 fighters. What, is it worth going to war when you can really settle it with such a small amount of money? And it looks really rational in many respects. Okay, if this is really the value of the contested water about which we are going to fight and can be solved by divvying in some small amount of water that will compensate the parties for the loss of their water. And I didn't like it, you know. I felt in my gut, coming from the region, that that's not a possible reflection of what that water is worth. And I added one constraint in this mathematical model that says that water should be used equitably in the region. I will put it in such a way that per capita use of water, every country in the region should be equal. And by God, the price of water would go right through the ceiling, and there is no money that all these countries, including their friends in the United States that seem to give them everything they need, it would not really compensate them for this amount of water they use, given that value that would be created if people were given a chance to have an equitable distribution of water. Talking about equity, maybe I should stop here and give equitable time to our next speaker. But I'll come back to, and hopefully you raise questions, and I have lots of answers.